The journeys of the pilgrim Saewulf can't be considered to be the start of the Crusades, as he was a traveller who visited distant lands from the Mediterranean to the city of Jerusalem. His tale begins when he left England to visit the uncharted city of Jerusalem in order to restore his faith as a Christian after having a very sinful past. Saewulf heard only stories of Jerusalem, hearing how holy the city was, how only the most righteous may enter the city's gates, or how it's the kingdom of heaven itself if he ever saw it. Whatever the reason Saewulf wanted to visit Jerusalem, he had to encounter weeks to months of dreadful sailing. His first few days at sea didn't start with a good impression, as he already got into one major shipwreck, causing him to switch boats midway through the trip. This did not discourage Saewulf, however, as he would then successfully travel to Jaffa, where an even worse weather condition would take place. As Saewulf was about to wake up after his first night in the city, he heard the cries of people screaming for their lives outside. Saewulf got up and ran out to see what was happening. He could see everything in action as the harsh breeze of wind hit him in the face. The former crew members of ruined ships were holding on to anything they could on the distant sea. Citizens of Jaffa were bumping into him to see what commotion was all about, and the guards were ordering everyone to keep calm. Turns out a violent storm broke loose and nearly destroyed half the ships that were heading into Jaffa. Luckily, the ship's crew were near the city shores, giving them the chance to swim to land without worry. The ships, however, were not so lucky, as some were reported to have landed on the sand, ripped to shreds, or driven into sharp rocks and hammered there until the rest of the storm had finished it off. The citizens of Jaffa and Saewulf watched as the crew members swam to the city. Those who did know how to swim, however, were able to survive the violent waters. Those who didn't were not so fortunate. People have claimed that the crew members were clinging to some parts of the ship, but were cut apart by the timbers, and some who knew how to swim voluntarily committed themselves to the waves, thus perished. On shore, nearly 1,000 corpses floated by as the citizens of Jaffa were forced to stare at their cold, dead eyes, possibly traumatizing them for life. As Saewulf walked across the valley of corpses and scared citizens, he claimed it was a greater misery on one day no eye ever saw. Luckily for Saewulf, he was able to land in Jaffa in only hours before the storm struck. Before that, he travelled to Corfu, Cephalonia, Corinth, the Dodecanese Islands to Rhodes. Several more days at sea landed him in the Cypriot port of Paphos, where 13 weeks later, he finally landed in Jaffa. Despite the dreadful encounters he had to experience, Saewulf discovered many amazing things on his journey. One of his favourite places was reportedly Greece, where he witnessed firsthand the silk workshops of Andros and the ruined Colossus of Rhodes. He also visited the ancient city of Myra with its beautiful semicircular theatre, and had been to Phoenice, a windswept trading port founded by the Phoenicians in an area known by the local people as 60 Oars, due to the roughness of the seas. He also had the chance to pray at the tomb of St. Nicholas, visited the footsteps for St. Peter, and finally, after all the hardships he went through, visited the very city that motivated him to start traveling, Jerusalem, where he intended to pray at the tomb of Jesus Christ. Approaching Jerusalem, Saewulf saw unimaginable sights to see. He entered Jerusalem through a heavily fortified portal in the city's thick defensive walls called David's Gate. The gate was guarded by a large stone citadel built on the remains of a fortress created by King Herod, a biblical figure who was said to have attempted to put every baby to death in order to kill the infant Christ. Saewulf then passed through the Temple Mount, crowned with the shimmering cupola of the Dome of the Rock, which the Christians call Temple of the Lord. Next to that, he saw the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was converted to Christian use for the King of Jerusalem, Baldwin I. Following the Temple Mount was Gethsemane, where Christ had prayed with his disciples, and where he was betrayed by Judas on the night of his arrest. Further from that site was the Mount of Olives, where Jesus had spent weeks teaching him, and was even the place where he ascended to heaven. Saewulf even had the chance to climb the Mount of Olives in order to observe the vast city of Jerusalem in afar. After seeing almost every landmark, Saewulf finally visited the most important and holy site for every Christian pilgrim to see, and that was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Saewulf said it was more celebrated than any other church, and this is meet and right, since all the prophecies and foretellings in the whole world about our Saviour Jesus Christ were all truly fulfilled there. As he stepped in, he saw dozens of interlinked chapels and courtyards. Saewulf began listing what he saw, from the prison where Jesus was kept after his betrayal, the spot where a fragment of the cross was found, known as the Calvary, where Christ was crucified, and finally, the most important site of them all, the sepulchre itself, the tomb of Christ. Saewulf, nervous more than ever, stepped into the cave where Jesus was buried after his crucifixion. The shrine was surrounded by burning oil lamps and paved with slabs of marble. Saewulf stood straight to admire the sight he was seeing. This place was the most sacred place to all Christians. Saewulf acknowledged what he saw with pride and detail and decided to be a worthy conclusion to his pilgrimage. Saewulf found himself in a fairly aggressive kingdom of Jerusalem as the First Crusade had recently ended, but the conflict within the city was still there. Regardless of what was happening, Saewulf made sure to appreciate the city before anything catastrophic happened. For the next 6 months, Saewulf explored every inch of the holy city and its surrounding area. He appreciated the Temple of the Lord, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Mount of Olives, and the Garden of Gethsemane one last time. As he was ready to depart from Jerusalem, Saewulf was a little hesitant. The roads around Jerusalem became unsafe thanks to the First Crusade's aftermath, and Saewulf didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. Saracens were patrolling all over the countryside, some even hiding in caves to scare anyone that passed by, and because of this, Saewulf and other travellers were on their toes when venturing into the wilderness at night. It was also common to find corpses littered around the lands. Some were because of wild beasts such as fox and leopards, some were soldiers who died in an open battlefield, some were just laying there because the ruthless heat couldn't spare them. Whatever the case may be, Saewulf wrote that burying someone is not just worth it in these times, and that anyone who would dig a grave would not be for his fellow Christian, but for himself. As Saewulf travelled through the outskirts of Jerusalem, he would find more Christian landmarks that were forced to be abandoned or attacked by Saracens. He stopped by the old cities of Bethlehem and Hebron, which was where the holy patriarchs such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, along with Adam, the first created man, were all buried. In the north, he would stop by Nazareth, the Sea of Galilee, and the city of Tiberias, where Jesus fed nearly 5,000 people. Saewulf travelled a little more through the treacherous lands where churches and towns collapsed and monasteries were filled with people mourning for their losses, looking for a place to hide. By the spring of 1103, Saewulf finally travelled as far as he could and fulfilled his purpose on these lands as a pilgrim. He returned to Jaffa in hopes to find a ship safely before the roads really started getting severe. Safety was still not guaranteed, however, as Cyprus was being patrolled by enemy ships from Fatimid Egypt. Because of this, Christian ships, especially the ship Saewulf had planned to board, couldn't go anywhere in fear of being attacked. On May 17th, Saewulf was finally able to board a large ship known as the Jone, which was travelling with 2 others. They were all heading north as quickly as they could, in hopes of avoiding enemy ships patrolling the seas. Things were going smooth for a while until the Jomons were approaching Accra and 26 Arab warships surrounded them. Saewulf gazed upon the sea as he soon realized the 2 other Jomons had abandoned him and were left to fend for themselves. The enemy ships formed a ring around Saewulf and his ship as his crewmates armed themselves for a fight in a strategic manner. Saewulf claims that these men were prepared to die for Christ, and it may be because of this that the Fatimid commander thought twice before attacking. After nearly an hour of consideration, the leader spared Saewulf the trouble and moved on to find easier targets to attack. Saewulf and his travellers thanked the Lord more than ever that day. A few weeks later, they arrived at Constantinople, where they were finally safe from the treacherous seas. As Saewulf contemplated the journey of a lifetime from the safety of his home, he mused that the only thing that protected him was the grace of God. And that is the story of Saewulf, the pilgrim from England who travelled all the way to Jerusalem in hopes to improve his faith with Christ. Despite facing many hardships along the way, such as storms and pirates, it could be said that the grace of God guided this pilgrim safely through his travels. Another fact that I would like to point out about pilgrimage is that it was part of Christian life, especially in the early 12th century, where people would travel great distances to visit shrines and altars dedicated to Christianity. Some did it for the good of their souls, while others like Saewulf did it to atone for their sins. Either way, Saewulf and the pilgrims like him are an interesting tale to tell, and I hope you enjoy this video, and I'll see you on the next one.